In their usual booth at Cozy Corner Cafe, a place familiar as their own reflections, Vanessa sat opposite Sabrina. Countless visits had blurred into one continuous thread of coffee and conversation. Vanessa idly stirred her spoon, a soft, almost wistful smile playing on her lips. It was the kind of smile that usually prefaced one of Sabrina's witty anecdotes, but today, it was different. A faraway look clouded Vanessa's eyes, as if her thoughts were wandering in distant lands. Sabrina, ever perceptive, noticed the subtle shift. She knew her friend too intimately to miss the change in her usual manner. "All right," Sabrina prompted, raising a questioning eyebrow, "spill it. What's going on with you and Gavin?" Her tone was light, teasing even, yet a keenness in her gaze betrayed her knowing Vanessa wouldn't easily deflect the question. Vanessa sighed deeply, gently placing her spoon on the saucer with a delicate clink. A moment of quiet hesitation hung in the air before she finally spoke. "Everything's fine," she murmured, but even to her own ears, the uncertainty in her voice was palpable. "I mean, he's a great husband. We've been together, almost 7 years." Her voice trailed off as she traced slow, aimless circles on the condensation of her coffee cup. "But sometimes, I can't shake this feeling, that something's lacking. Like, shouldn't there be more?" Sabrina's eyebrow arched higher, her curiosity piqued. "More?" she echoed, a hint of skepticism coloring her voice. "Are we talking about thrills? Passion?" Vanessa met her gaze and gave a small, hesitant nod. "Yeah," she admitted, her voice now softer. "Exactly that. We're comfortable, and that's not inherently negative, but Gavin seems entirely content with the status quo, while I don't know. I just feel like I crave something extra. Something that ignites that spark again." Sabrina's expression transformed, her interest deepening. She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially as though sharing a secret. "You know," she began, a playful glint in her eye, "I've been exploring something new myself. Have you ever considered broadening horizons a bit? Giving yourself the space to see other people?" Vanessa's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and disbelief momentarily paralyzing her face. "Wait, you're serious?" she asked, her voice a pitch higher than before. Sabrina didn't even flinch. She nodded, completely unfazed. "Absolutely. My husband and I discussed it, and honestly, it's been revolutionary for us. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic, just a little room to breathe. You'd be surprised, sometimes it actually strengthens the bond between couples." Vanessa leaned back, her mind racing. A part of her was undeniably intrigued, yet another part, a part she was hesitant to acknowledge, felt a tremor of anxiety. "But, how would I even broach a subject like that with Gavin?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Sabrina's expression softened, but her words remained straightforward. "You just be upfront. Men appreciate directness more than we often realize. If you try to sugarcoat it, he'll either be confused or assume something's amiss." Vanessa chewed her lip, her brow furrowed with worry. "But what if he interprets it as me not loving him anymore?" Sabrina shook her head firmly. "It's not about diminishing your love for him, you're simply articulating a need for something that helps you feel complete again. If you articulate it effectively, he'll understand it's about personal enrichment, not about him being deficient in any way." Vanessa released a slow breath, feeling the weight of her friend's words settle within her. "So, I tell him I want to feel more alive, that this isn't about us, it's about me needing more." She averted her gaze for a moment, doubt flickering in her eyes. "But Gavin's never been one for unconventional notions, he thrives on stability." Sabrina reached across the table, offering a reassuring squeeze of her hand. "If he genuinely loves you, he'll listen. And if he's willing to truly hear you, that's a positive indicator. It signifies he's open to navigating this together, even if the concept feels a little different." Vanessa took another deep breath, her nerves twisting within her. More than anything, she hoped Gavin would comprehend. The following evening, Vanessa found herself seated across from Gavin at their dining table, her heart pounding in her chest. She had rehearsed this conversation countless times in her mind, but now, in the actual moment, the words felt alien, uncertain. Taking a steadying breath, she began, "Gavin, there's something I've been contemplating," she said, her voice measured yet laced with vulnerability. Gavin looked up from his plate, his expression calm and attentive. "What is it, Vanessa?" he inquired, his voice gentle, inviting. Vanessa swallowed, her palms slightly clammy as she gathered her thoughts. "I've been feeling restless," she admitted, "not because of you, it's something internal. Like there's some dimension out there I need to explore." Gavin's expression softened further, and he set his fork down, giving her his undivided attention. Vanessa hesitated, searching for the precise phrasing. "I've been wondering if, perhaps granting each other a little more freedom could be beneficial. Not because my love for you has diminished, it hasn't, but because I genuinely believe it could enrich our relationship." She intently studied his face, anxiety gnawing at her, hoping for a flicker of understanding. For a protracted moment, Gavin remained silent, his expression inscrutable as he processed her words. Finally, he gave a slow nod, his voice even but tinged with an indefinable quality. "So, you're suggesting we open things up?" Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just, for a while. Just to see what it's like. I genuinely believe it could be positive for us." Gavin's gaze remained unwavering, his face composed as he leaned back in his chair. "I see," he said, his tone surprisingly neutral. "If that's what you require, Vanessa, I won't hinder you." A wave of relief washed over her, yet beneath it stirred a different sensation, a subtle tension she hadn't anticipated. She had mentally prepared herself for resistance, perhaps even an argument. Instead, Gavin had absorbed it in stride, almost too readily. He folded his arms, his expression still unreadable as he observed her. Then, after a pause, his tone shifted slightly, becoming more pointed. "So, this freedom," he said, his voice measured, "I presume this is reciprocal?" Vanessa froze, a sharp realization jolting through her. She had been so intensely focused on her own yearning for exploration that she hadn't truly considered Gavin's potential perspective on it. She had subconsciously assumed he'd simply acquiesce, accepting her need for something more. But now, meeting his steady gaze, she was no longer so certain. "Well, yes, suppose," she said hesitantly, "if that's something you'd desire too." Her voice wavered slightly. Gavin nodded slowly, his expression unwavering, inscrutable. "Thank you for your honesty, Vanessa. I believe I understand what you're asking." He released a measured breath, his gaze never breaking contact with hers. "I'm okay with it. I want you to be happy," he said, his voice calm, perhaps too calm. Vanessa managed a forced smile, but it felt strained, fragile. She had anticipated opposition, perhaps even a heated debate. Instead, Gavin had accepted it without question, and that left her feeling strangely off balance, as if she had relinquished control of a dialogue she believed she had orchestrated. A faint part of her had subconsciously desired him to react, to exhibit some discernible emotion that mirrored the gravity of their discussion, but he hadn't. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. "Thank you, Gavin," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "That truly means a lot." Gavin offered a small smile, but there was an undercurrent in his expression she couldn't quite decipher, something that caused a subtle tightening in her chest. It wasn't merely agreement, it was as if he, too, had reached a decisive conclusion. That peculiar feeling lingered with Vanessa, an almost imperceptible itch beneath her skin she couldn't quite scratch. A few days later, she and Sabrina found themselves entering a neon-drenched nightclub, the kind of establishment they hadn't frequented in years. The bass pulsed through the floor, vibrating beneath their feet. Bodies swayed in unison to the music, and flashes of colored light sliced through the dimly lit space. An electric energy charged the air, a kind of reckless abandon that made Vanessa feel alive in a way she hadn't in a long time. Sabrina flashed her a teasing grin. Well, look who finally decided to venture out," she shouted over the music. "How does it feel?" Vanessa laughed, though the sound was a little unsteady. "Honestly, I'm still processing it. I told Gavin, and he just agreed. No argument, no resistance. He was so placid about it." Sabrina raised a skeptical eyebrow. Wow, guess he's more broad-minded than I initially gave him credit for. See? I told you he'd understand if you simply articulated it. Vanessa nodded, but a faint frown creased her lips. Yeah, but it was almost too effortless. Like, zero hesitation. Sabrina chuckled, shaking her head dismissively. That's because he's contemplating his own options too, trust me. Guys like to play it cool, but he's probably already mapping out his own escapade. Don't overthink it, Vanessa. This is going to be beneficial for both of you. Vanessa attempted to suppress the uneasy sensation churning in her stomach. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. And what about you? She asked, deflecting the focus. Does your husband know you're here tonight? Sabrina hesitated, just for the briefest of moments, before shrugging it off. Oh, he's off on some hiking expedition with his buddies. We have an understanding, no questions asked, just trust. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. So, he doesn't inquire about your whereabouts or who you're with? Sabrina laughed, waving away the concern. She seized Vanessa's hand, pulling her towards the bar. Come on, Vanessa, honesty is commendable, but he doesn't need a complete itinerary. This is about freedom. A fleeting flicker of doubt crossed Vanessa's mind, but before she could dwell on it, Sabrina ordered them a round of drinks. She raised her glass, her eyes sparkling with exhilaration. To freedom. And new adventures. Vanessa clinked her glass against Sabrina's, taking a long sip. The drink was potent, sweet, and a warming sensation spread through her chest, easing the sharp edges of her apprehension. She allowed herself to melt into the moment, laughing as they navigated their way to the dance floor, losing themselves in the pulsing rhythm and the kinetic energy of the crowd. Not long after, Vanessa felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find a familiar face, Adrian, a colleague she had known for years. Yet tonight, bathed in the nightclub's flickering lights, he seemed different, more self-assured, more intriguing. Vanessa, he said with a subtle smirk, didn't anticipate seeing you here. She smiled back, feeling an unfamiliar thrill ignite within her. I could say the same about you. Adrian introduced his friend to Sabrina, and soon, the four of them were engrossed in animated conversation, laughter punctuating their drinks. The music throbbed around them. With each subsequent round, Vanessa felt her internal tension dissipate. She allowed herself to unwind, to be swept away by the ambience of the evening. What began as light-hearted amusement swiftly transitioned into something bolder. Laughter became flirtation, playful dares escalated into more intimate interactions. People exchanged dance partners, hands lingered longer, touches grew more suggestive. The boundaries Vanessa had mentally established, the ones she had reassured herself would remain intact, began to dissolve. Sabrina was in her element, effortlessly embracing the unrestrained energy of the night. Around them, the music intensified, the lights cast a hazy glow, and the playful banter turned overtly suggestive. Then, Adrian was beside her, his arm casually draped around her waist, his voice low, almost conspiratorial, against her ear. So, Vanessa, ready for a novel experience? His touch was casual, yet familiar, his gaze held an undeniable invitation, one she had been subtly reciprocating all evening. Vanessa's pulse quickened. The party had completely enveloped her, saturated her with its electrifying atmosphere, but now, in this specific moment, poised on the precipice of something more, she hesitated. She had spent weeks pursuing this very feeling, craving the thrill of novelty, and yet. I think so, she murmured, though her voice betrayed a lack of conviction. Around them, the crowd had begun to fragment, smaller groups retreating to quieter corners of the house. Vanessa found herself in a loose circle of relative strangers, voices hushed, laughter subdued, the overall ambience subtly shifting into something heavier, more intimate. Across the room, Sabrina caught her eye and raised her glass in a silent toast, as if to say, this is it. Just surrender to it. But suddenly, something within Vanessa shifted. The thrill she had been pursuing, the one that had seemed so exhilarating in theory, felt different now. The hands reaching towards her, the voices coaxing her forward, the warmth of Adrian's body so close, it wasn't excitement she was experiencing anymore, it was something else, something heavier. Vanessa took a step back, inhaling deeply. Actually, I don't think I'm ready for this. Not yet. Her voice was soft, yet firm. A few of them exchanged knowing glances, some nodding in understanding, others appearing faintly disappointed. Adrian, to his credit, offered a small, patient smile. He gently squeezed her arm in a reassuring gesture. "That's okay, Vanessa," he said softly. "Sometimes it just requires time." But Sabrina wasn't so quick to relinquish the moment. "Come on, Vanessa," she urged, her voice laced with playful amusement. "You were having fun. Just relax. You'll adore it if you simply give it a chance." Vanessa shook her head, her discomfort now palpable. "I really can't, Sabrina. I just need more time." Adrian exchanged a knowing look with Sabrina before lightly squeezing her shoulder. "It's all right," he said smoothly. "Vanessa should proceed at her own rhythm. Besides," he added with a playful grin, "I'm confident there are numerous individuals here willing to keep you entertained." Sabrina rolled her eyes but relented, swiftly being swept back into the party's current. The night surged onward, growing increasingly uninhibited, yet Vanessa no longer felt as though she belonged within its chaotic embrace. She slipped away into an unoccupied room, quietly closing the door behind her. For the first time all evening, she could actually hear her own thoughts. The sounds of the party were muffled, distant now. She poured herself a glass of wine, took a slow sip, and exhaled a breath she hadn't consciously realized she had been holding. And then, involuntarily, her thoughts drifted back to Gavin, to his strangely muted reaction when she had informed him of her night out, the unreadable quality in his eyes, the unsettling calmness that felt, not quite calm at all. Had she misjudged him? Had she been so single-mindedly focused on pursuing excitement that she had become blind to what was directly in front of her? A wave of unease washed over her. Hours ebbed away, and the party finally began to wind down. The crowd thinned, the lights dimmed, and people began to trickle out, their voices now lower, softer. Sabrina, still radiating the lingering euphoria of the night, located Vanessa sitting alone and playfully nudged her. "Hey, you alright? You vanished on me." Vanessa forced a smile, but it felt fragile, unconvincing. "Yeah, I don't think this is really my scene." Sabrina laughed, shaking her head dismissively. "You simply need a warm-up. Next time, you'll feel completely at home." Vanessa didn't respond, because for the first time, she wasn't certain she desired there to be a next time. By the time she departed, the sun had begun to ascend, its pale light filtering into the sky. The drive home was silent, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of passing streetlights. But Vanessa's mind was anything but still. For weeks, she had meticulously convinced herself that this was her desire, that this was her fundamental need. But now, all-consuming her thoughts was a single, persistent question she had deliberately tried to ignore all night: what had Gavin been doing while she was immersed in the party's chaotic energy? And for the first time, she wasn't sure she truly wanted to know the answer. Upon entering her house, Vanessa was met by a heavy silence. The darkness tonight felt qualitatively different, thicker, colder. She sighed, assuming Gavin had already retired to bed, but as she ascended the stairs, a peculiar chill crept up her spine. Something felt amiss. Her breath hitched in her throat when she saw their bed, impeccably made, completely untouched. The room felt too orderly, too empty. Gavin was gone. Her eyes frantically darted to the closet. A few of his garments were missing. The comforter from his side of the bed was absent. Panic constricted her chest. Her gaze landed on the nightstand, and her stomach plummeted. A neat stack of papers rested precisely on top. She approached, her hands trembling slightly as she picked them up. The stark, uncompromising letters emblazoned at the top of the page sent a shockwave through her. Divorce. The word screamed at her from the legal document, yet her conscious mind refused to fully process it. Her vision blurred, and a strangled whisper escaped her lips. This can't be happening." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Gavin's unsettling composure, his quiet nods of acquiescence when she spoke of an open marriage. He hadn't been agreeing, he had been waiting. Her fingers fumbled for her phone. Almost instinctively, she dialed his number, her heart hammering against her ribs. Voicemail. She tried again. The call rang and rang, but there was no answer. And just like that, Gavin was gone. In the ensuing days, Vanessa's desperation intensified. She left voicemail after voicemail, dispatched text after text, each more frantic than the last. But there was nothing, no response, no explanation. It was as if he had simply vanished from existence. Then, finally, a message materialized, but it wasn't from Gavin himself. The text originated from his lawyer, cold, formal, impersonal. The message was starkly clear: Gavin wanted out. No negotiation, no discussion, just finality. And just when she thought circumstances couldn't possibly deteriorate further, they did. At work, Vanessa swiftly registered the palpable shift. The formerly friendly nods, the warm smiles, all gone. Conversations abruptly ceased when she approached. The once familiar faces of her colleagues now bore a new expression: judgment. It didn't take long to discern the reason. Gavin had meticulously compiled everything: her text exchanges with Adrian, the incriminating photographs, even detailed accounts of the party itself. Somehow, it had all permeated the company's internal gossip network, spreading like wildfire. And her employer, known for its rigid and conventional values, did not tolerate scandal. The summons to her supervisor's office was swift. Their expression was inscrutable, but the disappointment in their voice was unmistakable. Vanessa was formally informed that her professional conduct was under official review. Her career, the job she had labored so diligently for, was slipping through her grasp. And the unfolding nightmare was far from its conclusion. By the time her court date arrived, Vanessa felt like a spectral presence, moving through the motions of her own life. Numb and in a daze, she sat in the courtroom, watching Gavin's meticulous preparation unravel before her. Evidence, private texts, photographs, surveillance documentation from a private investigator meticulously detailing her outings with Sabrina, her explicit flirtations with Adrian, even her documented presence at that now infamous party. It was all systematically laid bare, dissected piece by piece, leaving her nowhere to conceal herself. Her choices, once perceived as thrilling acts of liberation, now appeared reckless, naive in their execution. Gavin had been observing, not with overt anger or desperate pleas, but with cold, calculated precision. And now, every minute detail was weaponized, being methodically employed against her. Her betrayal was no longer a private matter between two individuals, it had metamorphosed into a public spectacle. The divorce proceedings were brutal, with absolutely nothing deemed off-limits. Every facet of her personal existence was ruthlessly dragged into the harsh glare of the public spotlight: her private messages, the documented nights out, the calculated deceptions. She wasn't merely losing her marriage, she was actively losing everything. The definitive blow landed swiftly and decisively: her job, terminated. Adrian, also, was summarily dismissed, his professional reputation irreparably damaged, collapsing alongside hers. And then, the one catastrophic consequence she hadn't even considered: Gavin had disseminated everything to Eric, Sabrina's husband. And the devastating truth struck her with the force of a physical blow. Sabrina's so-called understanding with Eric had been a complete fabrication. He had been utterly unaware, had certainly not consented. When he finally unearthed the reality, he filed for divorce without hesitation. The cascading fallout was immediate and devastating. Former friends abruptly turned their backs. Previously established social alliances shattered overnight. The once adoring social circle that had enthusiastically championed Sabrina's supposed boldness, now swiftly and completely abandoned her. Utterly humiliated and consumed by fury, Sabrina severed all ties with Vanessa, resolutely blaming both her and Gavin for the entirety of the ensuing catastrophe. And just like that, Vanessa found herself utterly alone. The scandalous rumors proliferated with astonishing speed. Distant acquaintances kept their distance. Neighbors exchanged whispered judgments. Even family members, once steadfastly supportive, now regarded her with an uncomfortable, quiet disappointment. Meanwhile, Gavin became the very embodiment of stoic grace, the unjustly wronged husband, handling his profound pain with quiet, almost saintly dignity. And Vanessa? She became the unequivocal villain of this unfolding narrative. One evening, after an extended period of enforced silence, Vanessa finally managed to reach him. Gavin consented to a meeting. They sat across from one another, the immense weight of everything that had transpired pressing down between them with almost physical force. Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes as she instinctively reached for his hand across the table. "Gavin, please," she whispered, her voice cracking with barely suppressed emotion. "I made a mistake, a monumental one. I genuinely thought. I honestly believed this would actually bring us closer, maybe even help us understand each other on a deeper level. I was only with Adrian that one time, and at the party. I couldn't even go through with it. Please, forgive me." Gavin exhaled slowly, deliberately, his gaze heavy, unreadable. "Vanessa," he said, his voice calm, devoid of inflection, "when someone proposes an open marriage, it typically signifies they've already reached a decision. The marriage was already fundamentally broken. You just hadn't acknowledged it yet." Her heart physically clenched within her chest. "You weren't honest with me," he continued, his voice unwavering. "You wanted to inhabit both worlds simultaneously, to indulge in exploration but without forfeiting me. You deliberately cultivated secrets, and that," he concluded, his voice dropping in finality, "is where the true damage was done."